Hi, everybody. Today is Tuesday, October 21st, 2025, and our friend, I'm not going to say our dear friend.
Good for you.
Welcome back, Larry.
Yeah. Good to be with you, dear friend Nima.
Larry, let's start with the Israeli attack on Gaza. We've learned from the Israeli media that following the resumption of Israeli military operations in Gaza, the courts have postponed Netanyahu's court testimony, which was scheduled to be held this week. And look, looking at the way that Netanyahu is behaving, he has approved a total blockade on Gaza. Where are we heading, in your opinion, with the Trump so-called peace plan?
Precisely where BB wanted to head. Now, I don't know if it's in collusion with Donald Trump. Remember, the last perfidious action was with regard to Iran. So it could well be in collusion with Trump. They've talked this over and they're going to play good guy, bad guy sort of thing, but they're both on the same sheet of music. I don't think that's the case because that would take some sacrifice of the limelight from Trump. And I don't think he likes that. So I say this is Netanyahu doing true Netanyahu things. He never had any intent of stopping. If you look at Haaretz and look at some of the other papers that keep up with things on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-by-minute basis, I think you'll find that there has been no ceasefire by the IDF whatsoever. It was announced, but they have not ceased fire. There has been someone killing someone throughout Gaza and the West Bank this entire time. So that's a typical Netanyahu ceasefire. He uses the beginning of the ceasefire to take tactical advantage of what's happening and do more damage. Did that in Lebanon, has done that all along in the West Bank when we would tell him to stop and he would say, I'm stopping, and then go right out and do it again. And he's doing it in Gaza. With the food thing, I think he's learned through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation and their really, really poisonous efforts with regard to killing Palestinians, very effective and efficient efforts. So he's learned that food is probably a better weapon even than tank main guns, artillery rounds, and ultimately the IDF Air Force, because he doesn't have to spend much. He just has to keep the food away from them and they die. That's one of the reasons we made it a horrendous war crime after World War II to use food as a weapon of war. But he doesn't care. He's doing that. And so there's no ceasefire. There never was going to be a ceasefire. Now, J.D. Vance and Witkoff and Kushner and all these envoys are headed for Israel or are already there. And they're going to put on a show of talking about troops that are going to come in from, are you ready for this? Azerbaijan and Armenia or wherever, to the only countries that feel like Trump actually did something for them. That's the way Trump thinks about it. And they don't really feel that way at all. They're laughing at him all the way to the peace table, if you will. And there is no peace table. So this is a joke right now, but it's a painful, sad joke because the killing is going to go on. Now, I will say this. Hamas knew this. Hamas is not stupid. They have proven throughout this 2 years of conflict and before that they're not stupid at all. And Israel thinking that it's taken out all their leadership. We used to have a saying in the American military, be careful what leader you kill. The guy who's under him or the gal who's under him might be better. Well, in many cases, that's what takes place. And Hamas has got really good leadership right now, tactical and operational leadership. So is Hezbollah, I'm told. I haven't seen it evinced yet, but I'm suspecting I will see it probably soon if he doesn't lay off Lebanon a little bit. But anyway, the leadership is pretty good, and they're doing a good job of fighting back, and they're doing a good job of fighting against the people Netanyahu has assembled to kill Hamas while he can't or doesn't seem to be. These rebel units that are in there. I think probably mostly ISIS or ISIS-affiliated units that we were actually training in Syria. They are now in Israel and some others too. But the bottom line is ceasefire is not ceasefire. And Hamas knows that, and they're taking advantage to kill more Israelis.
Here is, Larry, what Donald Trump, the reaction of Donald Trump after the attacks, Israeli attacks on Gaza.
Israel strikes on Gaza today.
Well, we're going to have to see what's happening. We want to make sure that it's going to be very peaceful with Hamas. And as you know, they've been quite rambunctious. They've been doing some shooting, and we think maybe the leadership isn't involved in that. You know, some rebels within, but either way, it's going to be handled properly.
Is the ceasefire still in place?
Yeah,
Rebels bought and paid for by Israel or the United States, could be us too. I mean, this president has no problem being disingenuous, outright lying. He has no problem.
These people, Larry, because we know that Donald Trump, earlier of the attacks happening, he said that Hamas is killing people in Gaza. He's talking about these rebels, these not rebels, these ISIS-like, you know.
He's not Hamas, as far as I know. I'm not on the battlefield, but as far as I know, Hamas is not killing fellow Hamas fighters or Palestinians in any regard, unless they happen to be members of these groups, and I suspect some are. They're paid very well, just like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Boy, if you saw the salaries these guys were getting, and essentially they were getting them to help the IDF kill Palestinians. So I think that's who Hamas is shooting at.
Yeah.
And they were very smart to keep 50 caliber and below and to make sure that none of that is ever going to be surrendered, because that's the kind of weaponry they need to fight the kind of war they're fighting now, a guerrilla war. They don't need the big stuff.
Two fronts of the conflict, Larry, in Gaza. One of them is the military front. The other one is what the Trump administration is trying to do by, you know, some sort of wrapping up the main objectives in Gaza in a peace plan, some sort of, you know, different. But the main goal, it seems to me that the ultimate goal is the same. Looking at, you know, there was an interview with the former Mossad and IDF, and he said they don't want Gazans there. They don't want, they're going to replace them. They're going to send them to other countries. Here is what he said, Larry.
Erase Gaza. We have to take the people there and send them to Libya.
What do you see as the future for Gaza?
No future.
A parking lot? A dumping ground?
You want a creative idea?
I do.
Okay, we have agreement. Suddenly they send some missiles. Our people send missiles from inside. And then we said, oh, there is a missile from Gaza. So now we can answer them.
So you think that's also something that's possible?
Everything is possible. We are going to erase Gaza.
Yeah.
It's not just him, Nima. It's Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, too. I've heard them make similar statements. In fact, I've heard them make worse statements. On the record statements, in front of Netanyahu's statements, in front of the Knesset statements. That's what they want to do. And of course, their ultimate objective is to do precisely to Gaza what they've done to the West Bank, or are doing to the West Bank very rapidly now, and East Jerusalem, and that is settle it with Jewish citizens. No Palestinians remaining other than maybe a few for slave work.
I don't know if you watched the interview that Donald Trump had with Fox News. He's somehow repeating the same thing, but differently. He's talking about Freedom Place. And what is the definition of that? Here is what Donald Trump said.
Developed, and you said you wanted to develop it.
Well,
Do you
not
have
me
plans for that?
Not me as an individual.
The U.S.
I liked it as like Freedom Place. You call it Freedom Place, and we would get all of the people that live there into decent homes throughout the region. If you look, Egypt has a lot of land. Jordan has a lot of land, you know, right next door. A lot of countries have a lot of land. So I had an initial vision that we would get them. Look at Gaza. I mean, you know, there's nothing standing. The whole thing it's all rubble. So it's not too hard to top that. Israel can say that we killed 50,000. And so you'd say it's a whole new set of people. And it is. I mean, you know, they get replaced by other people, young people.
Those are absolutely horrible comments if you parse them closely. Well, you don't even have to parse them closely. Just listen to them. They are utterly horrible comments. He's really talking about what I've been saying all along. They're not going to dig the 100,000 dead people, 50% of whom are women and children, out from under that rubble. They're going to pave over it. This is Trump's idea. I'm not saying this is Netanyahu's. I think Netanyahu wants to settle it. I know Ben-Gvir and Smotrich do. They want to settle it just like they're doing the West Bank. But what Trump was suggesting is they're going to pave over it. There's no one. Oh, no. You know, the New York Times, the Washington Post, all these media outlets in America, they don't even begin to realize how many dead people there are. I think there's more than 200,000. I think there's forensic evidence right now. There's modeling simulation evidence right now that takes into consideration ordnance use, density of population, type of construction on the ground, road networks, all these factors that go into this analysis that says there are at least 200,000 Palestinians dead. By demographic assessment, at least 50% are women and children. And there are many of them. What are they saying now is the official total? 60,000, something like that? Well, that leaves 140,000 dead people, Nima, underneath the rubble. They're going to pave it over and Trump's going to make a beautiful city. Those were horrible remarks. And let's look at how stupid this man is. Either that or he's just a conniving, lying sack of proverbial horse turds. I think a little bit of both most of the time. He just lied right straight out of the moment he opened his mouth. Jordan does not have a lot of land. Ask the king. Egypt does not have a lot of land. Ask Sisi. In fact, I just read a National Geographic assessment of Israel's plight with all the refugees it already has from all over East Africa, with its own people. It can't feed, it can't water, and it cannot house. Even if it turned into a Mecca tomorrow morning, the density of population to the possibility of life is such that it could not possibly do it. Nor could Jordan, really, if you look at it. Water alone would be prohibitive. So he's lying through his teeth. There is not a lot of land. There is not a lot of food. There is not a lot of water. Period. There's not a lot of space, actually. If you cram them all into Egypt, you'd have shoulder-to-shoulder people. That's what Sisi's sitting on. He's sitting on a time bomb that might go off at any moment. And the question is, where does the Egyptian military go when it goes off? But he's lying through his teeth, Nima. I don't know where he gets these points and this history. Steve Miller, Laura Loomer, someplace that's exotic and strange because there's no truth in it.
If that's the case, it seems that all the plan about the peace and, I don't know, ceasefire, it was just to help Israel and Netanyahu to clean up what they've done so far.
And to burnish his, even if he can't get the Nobel Peace Prize, to burnish his record as a peacemaker. I mean, I think he's still very much interested in that. And this is, of course, in Ukraine, and there are some real developments there now if they go ahead. But this in Ukraine are all he's got left that's formidable and in the press on a 24/7 basis to make peace in. So, and I think I really do think he's angry and finally fed up with Bibi Netanyahu. But I think Bibi senses that. So that makes him go even harder and faster. And you know, the ultimate goal is regime change in Iran and Trump not being a reluctant warrior to back him up. So that's Bibi's ultimate plan. That plus, as you suggested, staying out of jail.
The regime change through military operation?
I think it's going to be a combination. Israel has shown me in the past that it's pretty good and pretty smart about using a combination of forces when it does something like it will have to do with Iran. So it's going to try once again, and it's probably working feverishly 24/7 right now in all manner of places around the periphery of Iran and even inside Iran, to develop another third column, fifth column, call it what you will, people who are being paid by Israel to do this or do that inside Iran, to go after some of the facilities the Iranians have their really sophisticated missiles in, to do clandestine, covert, direct action inside Iran. What I'm hearing is that they are reporting back to Netanyahu that there isn't a lot of dice in this now. That is to say, they're worried that they won't be able to create this kind of guerrilla force inside Iran prior to hostilities, because the Iranians learned very well how to counter it. And they have made known throughout the country, if anyone gets caught in this regard, they're going to be short shrift very quickly. And so that, plus the fact, as you know, that the Iranians kind of came together. Now they've got Iranians who will report on these people. They've got Iranians who before would have looked the other way. Now they will report on them to the central authorities. So I think Netanyahu is probably getting a report back that says it isn't going to be as nice as we thought it was going to be, boss.
Yeah. Larry, did you watch the interview that Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had on 60 Minutes?
I did. And
yeah.
I mean, I thought, what a disconnect. I mean, you going to play it?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to play it because they have the copyright. They don't let us to. I once did, and they cut.
I'm surprised they let that out. I really am. I'm very surprised they let that out. I think somebody screwed up.
You know what was so amazing during the interview? That Witkoff said that he receives the intelligence from CIA 3 times a day, and every time they're saying Hamas is not ready for talks, to negotiate. Who's running CIA? Who's behind this?
You tell me. The man running CIA, the man in charge of CIA, is an alternative head of Mossad. Okay? The man running our Central Intelligence Agency works for Mossad. So I can't tell you what's going on in the CIA. I don't think the bowels of CIA is so utterly contaminated yet as it was during Iraq's WMD imbroglio. You couldn't get anything. The center was so contaminated, and McLaughlin had such a lock on. McLaughlin was George Tenet's deputy and the only real intelligence expert at the very top. He had a lock on the analysts. He would not let the analysts who had contrarian views get anywhere near Powell or me. We didn't find that out until afterwards, but he absolutely forbade anybody to come in that room with Colin Powell or with me in preparation that wasn't on George Tenet, George Bush, Dick Cheney's sheet of music with regard to WMD. Now, I don't know if that was criminal. I don't know if they knew the truth and were doing that because they knew the truth and didn't want it to get out, or if they actually believed that the intelligence they were getting through people like Laura Loomer was the most accurate intelligence, and so they wanted to keep the other people out of the game. But right now, I can tell you that the director of the CIA is a Mossad agent, not an agent getting pay, but he is working for Mossad. He's working for Bibi Netanyahu. All you have to do is take a look at his record.
When it comes to the intelligence that gets to the President of the United States, what is the role of Tulsi Gabbard? And what is the role of CIA? How the combination of the two, how does it work?
the idea behind the latest amendment to the National Security Act, which created the Director of National Intelligence, was that that person would take the responsibility from the director of the CIA away from him or her and put it in a separate individual. Before, the Congress was so worried, post-World War II, presidents too, so worried about the intelligence community having a single head and becoming like, dare I say it, like some of those in South America who wound up almost running their country into the ground. They didn't want that, so they wouldn't do it. Well, they did it in this act. The now the final change amendment to the National Security Act creates this single individual who is responsible to the president, the National Security Council, and the cabinet as a whole for strategic intelligence. And he is responsible for coordinating the other 16, everything from the military component to the FBI, to Treasury, to states INR, to the DIA, the whole thing. She's responsible for coordinating that entire community, achieving consensus, and giving that to the president. That is not happening. That is not happening. If anyone is achieving momentary consensus, it's Steve Miller and Laura Loomer. And Tulsi Gabbard is outside that whole loop. That make you feel good? It makes me scared to death.
Exactly. Larry, one of the points that I found it so absurd when Kushner was talking about the situation in Gaza. He said that he felt like that the Gaza was bombed with nuclear bombs, but after all, he doesn't feel that that was a genocide, because then, Witkoff comes in and says that this is a war. They say, absolutely, this is a war. What type of war is that?
It is a war, Nima, and this has not been said enough, and I'm guilty of not saying it enough too, but I'm going to say it here in clarion terms. This is not what people present it as. The New York Times, the Washington Post, all the mainstream media in this country, Europe, London, Paris. This is a legitimate, under international law that we helped to craft from 1945 on, a legitimate struggle between a people who are oppressed against their oppressor. Period. October the 7th was a legitimate action by Hamas against Israel, because Israel, go back and read the UN Security Council resolutions. I did that the other day. I couldn't believe some of the things I was reading and that I had forgotten. All the things the UN declared in UN Security Council resolution after resolution. Read the ones they said, for example, made Israel into a state and what Israel had to do in order to comply with the UN strictures if it were to become a state. They violated all of those. So what is happening is a legitimate operation of an oppressed people against their occupier. It's legitimate. Everything Hamas has done is legitimate. Now, I'm not saying that that authorizes you to kill babies and that sort of thing, because there are other rules of land warfare that govern that. And there are probably some criminal acts in there somewhere, although there aren't nearly as many as Netanyahu has publicized, because I think Mearsheimer and others are right that 50% at least of the casualties on October the 7th were created by the Israeli Defense Forces or by Israelis responding and shooting haphazardly. Apache helicopters, for example, probably did a lot of the damage. So this is a legitimate struggle by Hamas against an oppressive state, period. That's the first thing you have to realize and understand. You think that Kushner and Witkoff, even if they could rationalize that in the scope of the law, the body of law I've just cited, which is irrefutable, you think they could admit that? You think they could even come to that conclusion? I don't, because they're just fundamentally out to lunch when it comes to the actual situation we're confronting. And part of that being out to lunch is because they're so committed to Israel. And then part of that is political. And then part of it is the propaganda of Netanyahu, which I have to admit again and again and again is some of the best, if not the best propaganda in the world.
The attack on Doha, Witkoff said he didn't know about it. He just
Right.
woke up and found it, and the president called him and said, what they're doing, this is not going to benefit Israel. It seems that Donald Trump himself didn't know about it. But how about CIA? Did they know about it? How is that possible to go in that direction that far without informing the people in the United States?
This is precisely what I revealed to Powell one time, and he didn't like it at all, about Bob Woodward. You know, Bob Woodward writes these books that are tell-alls, and Bob goes and he interviews the primary and just underneath the primary characters in some scene or some event. And he tapes it. And then he comes back and he reports in his books the exact words they spoke to him because he's got it on tape. So he's protected in terms of defamation or whatever. I mean, he's protected. And I know this because I've talked at length with one of his researchers. You go back to the record, if there is a record, and I did on several occasions. And on one occasion, I was the record because I was sitting in the room when Colin Powell was supposedly making the remarks Bob reported in the book, and several other people too, whom Bob reported in the book. Those weren't the right remarks. What happens is the principals whom he is interviewing after the crisis spin the story to their own benefit. I mean, it's just a natural thing. Sometimes they're just embellishing, which is a human tendency to make yourself look better. Other times they're outright lying. And then Bob reports that as the unvarnished truth in his books. I can go through the commanders or any of his books that I was present during some of the interviews. I can go through them and show you where people are being reported illegitimately, incorrectly. But Bob is protected because that's what they said in the meeting, and he has that on tape. That's what's happening here. These people are lying through their teeth, and I doubt very seriously if they're protected the way Bob protects himself. They're just simply making things up that more correspond with what they'd like you to believe than actually happen. Now, I'm not saying that Witkoff and Kushner are fully vested and fully knowledgeable of what actually happened, nor am I saying Trump is. In fact, I'd say Trump is probably the most out of the picture person in the whole presidency. But there is a tendency within that group, and I've seen it at work. I know it's there. And this administration really has this tendency to fix the story after the events to support their version of the events. And that's what's happening here.
Kushner was revealing a grand, plan for Gaza during the interview, and he was asked, "What is that plan?" And we don't know if he described it during the interview because, after all, when they edited the video, you don't see that coming.
Right.
But we have the previous interview of Kushner talking about Gaza. Here is what he said, Larry.
Property. It could be very valuable to if people would focus on kind of building up livelihoods. You think about all the money that's gone into this tunnel network and into all the munitions. If that would have gone into education or innovation, what could have been done? And so I think that it's a little bit of an unfortunate situation there. But I think from Israel's perspective, I would do my best to move the people out and then clean it up. But I don't think that Israel has stated that they don't want the people to move back there afterward. The thing that I would try to do if I was Israel right now is I would just bulldoze something in the Negev. I would try to move people in there. I know that won't be the popular thing to do, but I think that that's a better option to do so that you can go in and finish the job.
Yeah.
A little bit of the truth crept out there, a little bit of the truth so that you can go in and finish the job. But listen to what he said. Listen to the opening remarks. Who's got the most money to do something positive? He's asking Hamas not to build tunnels, not to buy weapons, to fight an insurgency against an oppressor. He's asking them. They're poor people, fundamentally poor people. Where they get their money? They get it from Bibi Netanyahu through Qatar. They get it from other places too, no doubt, possibly Iran, possibly Saudi Arabia, possibly other Arab countries. But they're not rich people by any stretch of the imagination. Look at Israel. We've given them $30 billion just for this 2 years. We've given them countless billions since we started giving them $3 to $4 billion every damn year. So Kushner, where's the money? You freaking idiot. You lying sack of proverbial horse turd? Or you're just stupid. Where is the money? The money's on the other side, dude. Why isn't some of that money, using your rationale, being spent to make Gaza a better place for the Palestinians? Not for the Israeli settlers, for the Palestinians, the genuine owners of the land for 3,000 years. Oh, Donald, you don't do history? Oh, you don't know that, Donald? Come, let me give you a basic geography lesson, a basic history lesson. And oh, by the way, Jared, I just told you where the money is. How much of it are you going to spend on those poor people in Gaza? Twist everything out of proportion, out of shape, don't know their history, broken in their understanding of the region and the situation itself. But I gotta think, Nima, they can't be that stupid. So what are they doing? They're fabricating things for essentially stupid, ignorant, dumb people who populate this globe today and occupy the halls of places like the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Washington Times, and the rest of the mainstream media, and others in this country in particular, but in Europe too, who are simply stupid people. They just don't want to look at the truth. I mean, that's part of it. They have no motivation whatsoever to look at the truth. The truth on the other side of their very gilded coin is so diametrically opposed to what they want that they've convinced themselves that what they want is the truth.
You know what's so amazing, Larry? They don't know how the Gazans, Palestinians feel about their land, you know. It's something beyond me to understand what these guys are talking about. Because
I was looking last night at some of the testimony of the Cherokee in this country, many, many years ago, of course, and then some of the testimony of the Nez Perce in this country, and then some of the testimony of the Oglala Sioux and other tribes. I even looked at some of the tribes, some 60 plus tribes that were here on the East Coast, many of whom were in Virginia at one time or another. We did the same thing. The Cherokee in particular were a very educated people, probably more educated man for man, woman for woman than the Americans around them, than the British around them, than the French around them. And I mean that. They probably were more sophisticated people. And, you know, we treated them like hell. So it's not something that's new on the face of the earth, but it is something that should have been tempered post-World War II in particular. And guess who helped and put the most powerful hand into the tempering? America. And now look at what we're doing. So this is a retrograde of monumental proportions for this empire. It is a complete repudiation of everything that we stood for post-World War II, and however imperfect, we brought to fruition in what is now called international law, international humanitarian law, international criminal justice, and other aspects. We were responsible for bringing all that together to bear on the world, what we call the international order. Well, I'm sorry. We are the biggest violators of that entire tapestry now. We are an anathema in this world. We have become our own worst enemy. And the world's own worst enemy.
I think that's the reason. Richard Wolff, Larry, said that, yeah, the West did it before, but this time around is different because nobody would accept it.
We know better. We do.
Yeah.
You can say we knew better in the 1800s and the late 1700s, but that's not true if you go back and you look at it closely. We didn't know better. Maybe individually, we knew that when we took a tomahawk and cut a little baby in half, who happened to be a Native American, we probably knew in our brain pad, that there was something probably a little bizarre about doing that. But in terms of taking their land, in terms of settling the country, in terms of pushing them out, in terms of treating them like dirt, we really didn't know any better. I mean, that was the way the world operated at that time, including us. If you go back and look at Columbus, Columbus was one of the most heinous people that ever hit the New World. He was terrible. He was as bad as Cortez, Pizarro, all those other conquistadores. He was terrible. He murdered people. He murdered little babies. He killed children. He killed women, all for bloody lucre. But that was the way of life then. God help us if we haven't come away from that.
Netanyahu doesn't want Turkish and Qatari involvement in Gaza's post-war administration. He said that, such participation would be a red line for Israel. What would these two countries bring to the situation in Gaza that Netanyahu is not happy about?
Were I a leader of any country, Israel included, even in its present state, let's say Netanyahu was gone suddenly, magic, and I was the leader, I wouldn't want Erdogan there either. That said, I think he has some peculiar concerns about Erdogan being there because he sees it as the Turks getting a foot in the Levant that they shouldn't have. After all, if you know history, they've been there before. And he is not necessarily opposed, although I think ultimately he would be, to any foreign troops coming into Gaza. He certainly would be opposed to those who have previous histories of empire that included that region and have, to put even a neutral spin on it, a lust for former gain and former glory. And Erdogan is a perfect example of that. I would not want his troops there. Now, I've said in the past, if Turkey wanted to enter this thing in a military way and end the crisis, in the war, and maybe end the existence of the state of Israel, I'm not sure I would object. But I don't want them lingering. And that's what Netanyahu is scared of. That's what all of them are frightened of, that someone would linger and they would be more powerful than the country that's there right now, Israel.
We had, I don't know if we can call him the president of Syria. It's Al-Jolani.
Sort of sticks in your mouth, doesn't it?
Yeah, he went to Russia. He met with Putin. And
Jeff, did you see that picture? I couldn't believe how tall he is. I've seen him before. I knew he was probably pretty. He must be about 6'6" or something.
Yeah.
Putin looked like a midget in front of him.
Yeah. When he, it seems that Russia and China, the head of Security Council in Iran went to Russia and in the aftermath. And we know today that
is that Larijani? Who is that?
Larijani, Ali Larijani. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. He's a very, very,
very smart guy.
He's so smart. He's so smart. Yeah, and he knows everything and about Iran. And he's so wise, by the way, in terms of the foreign policy of Iran, Larry. And when it comes to today, we've learned that Alexander Lavrentiev, the Russian president's special envoy to Syria, he went to Iran to talk with Iranians. Then it seems that he's gonna go to Syria. But what is going on in the mind of Russians and Iranians after the fall of Assad and the new administration in Syria? Are they gonna getting somehow closer to the position of Turkey because they know what's going on after all in Syria could be managed by their foreign policy?
I think we're looking at, and you and I talked about this in our previous dialogue too, I believe. I think we're looking at an attempt by Iran to patch up, perhaps, at the same time Russia's looking at an attempt to patch up relations over Syria. That's a clumsy way of putting it, but I think Russia wants back into Syria. It wants better relations. Iran wants back into Syria. It wants better relations. And the two are willing to coordinate the way they do that. I mean, that's making it a little complicated, but I think that's what's happening. And I think I'm seeing a leader of Syria right now, ostensible leader anyway, who is aware of his need for that because of Israel, and to a lesser degree because of Turkey, but at any moment it could become to a greater degree because of Turkey. And the Kurds are playing in this too. I don't know if you're looking at what's happening with the Kurds in Iraq right now, but they're their own worst enemy. They're their own worst enemy. They just got an agreement between Baghdad and the Kurdish Oil Authority to begin to attract the nationals back in, the big internationals, I should say, the global oil companies back in. And they can't solidify it because the two factions, Talabani and who's the other guy, I can't remember his name now, but they've always been there. They're fighting each other in Kurdistan, in that northern part of Iraq. Sulaymaniyah against Erbil and against Kirkuk and so forth. They're their own worst enemy. But that's a factor they've got to consider too, and how Turkey's looking at them and how they're looking at Turkey. But fundamentally, I think they're worried about Israel. And I would be too if I were they. And I think the leader in Damascus has figured out that one of his worst future problems is going to be Israel. He was trying to work with them. And I think now he's figured out that you don't work with Israel. They stomp you. And so you got Russia and Iran giving him some possibilities in terms of standing off against Israel. And so we're going to see both countries in different ways. I think the Russians want their port back, or they want their airfield and their port. You're going to see them coming back into Syria, I think. And it's going to be I hope, if it's done rightly, it's going to be good for Syria's ultimate security. And that's something that's important now that I think Israel and Turkey, to a certain extent, too, are showing some, shall I say, covetous aims with regard to Syria. And this is going to play out over time, of course, but I think Russia and Iran will probably wind up winning this struggle. It's a good way for Iran to get its front back, so to speak, against Israel.
It's not just about Syria. We had the head of Iraq's national security going to Iran and reaffirming the commitment to security pact with Iran and rejecting the use of the airspace for attacks against Iran.
And I understand. I understand from the Iraqi oil report and from friends of mine who were in Iran or in Iraq during the time we were working with their oil ministry, that they've settled most of their problems with regard to oil. Which was always a sore point between Saddam Hussein and, the Ayatollah and vice versa. And it still was a sore point. But now apparently the fields actually flow in both countries. And so, you can diagonally stick your thing in the ground and you can steal the country's oil and vice versa. So they've made an agreement there, and the agreement looks like it's going to hold, which is part of this bigger agreement. And even ExxonMobil, which is the creme de la creme of the international oil companies now, is thinking about relooking at Iraq. And this is all because of this agreement that they're making, agreements, plural, that they're making around their border and getting this all in hand, because these big oil companies don't want billion-dollar lawsuits for stealing other people's oil,
You know what has happened, Larry, in the aftermath of the war between Iran and Israel, which was somehow surprising for me? It's not just about Iran and the Iranian people, it's about Iraqi people. You know, somehow, you know, in the those people who were somehow close to Saddam Hussein, they didn't like Iran.
No.
They had some sort of, you know, that sort of feeling. They somehow hated Iran, and even with the new government in Iraq. But you know what has changed? You know, the population, the way that they see Iran in the aftermath of the attack, Iranian attack on Israel, it has changed drastically in Iraq, and it was amazing to me to see what is happening to the Iraqi people.
Which is a major transformation. A major transformation. My son told me when he was working in Kirkuk with the Iraqi Air Force during the Second Iraq War, that the one thing that united all of the Iraqi Air Force, you could talk about all manner of subjects and you would get discussion, but the one thing that united them in hatred was Persians. And now you're right. Now that's changed. It's changed.
You know what was the reason? One of their experts on their domestic media said that who's able to hit Israel the way Iran did? No one in the Arab world is capable of doing this. That's why they're changing their mind toward Iran. They see, you know, the final, you know, it was huge in my opinion.
Well, there's
what
that.
In Iraq.
There's that, and then there's also I'll call it the Islamic ethic. You know, this was really deceitful, perfidious, Machiavellian, call it whatever derisive adjective you want, what the United States and Israel did to Iran. And, you know, honor, I've always found in both Persian and Arab communities, is a viable concept still. Might not be in the West, but it's still very viable concept in both Arab culture and Persian culture. It means something, in other words.
Yeah. Larry, shifting the gear to the conflict in Ukraine, Donald Trump was supposed to have a meeting with Vladimir Putin, but he said before that the two, you know, the foreign minister Lavrov and Rubio are going to meet, and it seems that was postponed, and they're just somehow they try to communicate through the phone calls and these sort of communications. If we put ourselves in the shoes of Putin, seeing what has happened in the Middle East, you know, with the talks, with the negotiations with Iran, right now with the new so-called peace agreement with Palestinians, how would you imagine, how could you believe what Donald Trump is talking about? And that's why I think that they're so hesitant toward, you know, reaching, because after all, it seems the main issue still in Ukraine is the ceasefire, imminent ceasefire, which is not accepted by Russians.
No, and it never will be, because they're winning. If you're winning a war as dramatically as Russia is this one, you don't want a ceasefire. If you're winning, period, you usually don't want a ceasefire. But if you're winning as dramatically as Russia is, you certainly don't want one. And let's look at the tapestry, the wider tapestry right now. We're having serious talks, I'm told, and I think it's a good source, about what Russia has suggested with regard to a tunnel underneath the Barents Sea, connecting Russia and the United States. China is now breaking ground, I'm told. I haven't been down there. I'd love to go down there. I haven't been to Nicaragua in a long time. In Nicaragua, for the new canal that will cross that isthmus and change the entire dynamic of the Gulf of America and the Pacific Ocean. At the same time, we're talking about new economic relations with not only Russia, but also China in a serious vein. John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, who is a sycophant par excellence to Trump, announced that I don't think he would even breathe this language without Trump's permission, announced that maybe they're going to put a little hold on these extra sanctions that were going to go on countries selling oil to Russia or buying Russian oil or dealing with Russia in a significant economic way. And at the same time, I'm told that Lavrov and Rubio have actually talked about, shall we say, the post-war situation in Ukraine, in terms that would indicate that both men and both ministries have planning cells working on the post-Ukraine situation. And not to be discounted either, I hear that Trump has actually let the European leaders, Starmer, Macron, and Merz in particular, know that he's not interested in using the frozen Russian assets for Ukraine's benefit. And there are other things too, lesser than that. I understand Trump finally got told how many cruise missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles, there actually are in the U.S. inventory and how many are actually planned. Yeah. Sorry, Mr. Trump, you misspoke. So all these things are kind of coalescing, I think, to present a more positive picture with regard to Trump's possible play with Putin over the Ukraine conflict and his possible shutting out Zelensky entirely. I hope I'm right. I hope that's actually what's happening. If it is, we might see a stop to this. But footnote, I don't think we're going to see a stop until Odessa is in Russian hands. And that's going to be a significant blow to the rump state, neutral state of Ukraine post-conflict, because they will have no port. And here's another one. As Putin was supposedly going to go to this meeting in Hungary, I believe it was, Sikorsky from Poland let it be known very publicly that if Putin overflew Poland, he'd be arrested for war crimes. Or he might be. I think he put it like that. He conditionality'd it. Well, does Sikorsky think that Putin's plane's not going to be accompanied by enough aircraft to shoot him out of the air and to take care of any threat there is to Putin? But anyway, this is Sikorsky. This is the Polish idiot. All of this is percolating right now, and I hope it's percolating toward peace, ultimately. I don't know. Trump fools you every time you think he's headed for peace, and I don't discount that possibility here, too, but I hope we're going to have some moves now that will shut this theater of war down.
Larry, there was a tweet by Kirill Dmitriev, one of the important negotiators on the part of Russians. He was communicating with Elon Musk, saying that we can connect Russia to the United States by the tunnel, a 70-mile tunnel that can connect the two countries. It's going to be a sign of unity for both countries.
Yeah.
But is that any sort of understanding of that? Is anybody interested in that, in this?
I think there would be, and perhaps is, especially in the business community and especially in Alaska, because it would be a significant enterprise in the first place, which would create a lot of jobs and a lot of money. I understand it's in a high earthquake prone zone, but I also understand that the Japanese, and I should have known this before I even had to look it up, but they have a tunnel that's in a much worse propensity to hurricanes to earthquake zones, seismic activity, and it's doing fine. You can build them sophisticated enough to where they can probably ride through something like this. I think the Japanese one is on a scale of 9, 1 to 10. And the Barents Sea is on a scale of 6.9 or 7 on a scale of 10. So it's not quite as bad, but it's doable. And with the technology we have now, and with the Japanese helping, maybe, we could do it. And it would be a boon for both sides. Anything that comes into what we used to call the Far Eastern TVD, military theater of the Soviet Union, now the east of Russia. Anything other than China that comes into that region is a welcome thing for Russia, for sure, because the Chinese are going to own that region if they don't do something.
Yeah.
Lebensraum. The Chinese need Lebensraum, living room Hitler talked about.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today.
Surely.
Great pleasure, as always.
Take care.
And see you on Friday.
You're going to wear your Aloha shirt on Friday?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. Good deal. See you then.
See you. Bye.
Bye-bye.